To Amin Saikal, who's a Professor Emeritus of Middle Eastern Studies at the Australian National University. He joins us live now from Canberra. Professor, really good to have you back with us. Can we talk about the impact that this war is having on Israel? I mentioned some points there about how essentially Israel has been weakened on many fronts. Talk to us more about that.
Well, it has had an enormous impact on Israel. It is very widely condemned internationally, and also Israel is polarized considerably domestically. In the sense that the population of Israel is very much divided between those who have wanted a ceasefire and the release of the hostages as the prime objective of the government, and those who have really pushed for the war. And of course, the ones who pushed for the continuation of the war have been Prime Minister Netanyahu and some of his extremist ministers, including the Minister for National Security and the Minister for Finance. And I think at the end, of course, they found themselves with no choice but to negotiate with their bitter enemy, though indirectly, and that is Hamas. And I think the scenes of Hamas fighters coming out in large numbers and handing over the 3 hostages to International Red Cross to be transferred to Israel, to Israeli forces on Sunday must be really a better pill for Mr. Netanyahu and some of his very hardline supporters to swallow, because one of the main objectives of the whole Israeli campaign in Gaza was to eliminate Hamas. But obviously that objective has not really completed in any way. And Hamas has remained resilient. And the second thing basically was to make sure that the post-war Gaza does not really fall into the hands of Hamas. But it looks like that Hamas is still alive and kicking and capable of mounting resistance. And I think that must be quite really, in many ways, humiliating for Prime Minister Netanyahu and his supporters. But at the same time, that is also an issue on which he could dwell in order not to, for example, negotiate the second stage of the withdrawal and the third stage of the withdrawal of the ceasefire. He has ample opportunity to resume fighting if he thinks it's absolutely necessary for his own political survival, as well as for making sure that Israel remains on course as far as its national security is concerned.
Yes, the question of Hamas is an interesting one, isn't it? Because when we saw the Israeli hostages being released, we did see very clearly several members of what appeared to be Hamas members facilitating that exchange. And as we know, a part of the ceasefire deal in perhaps the later stages is the governance of Gaza, a future in Gaza, and a lot of people, including the Israelis and those in the US, say that Hamas can play no part in governing a future Gaza. But at this stage, that aim seems unlikely, doesn't it?
Well, it does seem unlikely, and if Hamas is not a party to determining the future of Gaza, then it's always in a position to wreck it. And Israel has fought Hamas for the last 15 months and has not been able to wipe out Hamas as Prime Minister Netanyahu had promised that he would be able to do it within 6 months. And after 15 months, that objective has not been entirely achieved. And I think whatever one thinks of Hamas, whether it's a terrorist organization or it's a part of a Palestinian National Liberationist Movement or whatever it is, it has really survived the Israeli onslaught, and to the extent which is able to prompt Prime Minister Netanyahu to negotiate a ceasefire with Hamas, though indirectly.
Of course, we are in the very early days of even the first phase of this ceasefire deal, but over the next two phases, we are expecting to see the continued exchange of Israeli captives and Palestinian prisoners. The first two stages also call for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, including the Philadelphia corridor between Egypt and Gaza. And the third stage, if those first two phases are successful, will call for a comprehensive reconstruction plan for Gaza. So a lot of ambitious goals there. How hopeful are you that we will see a permanent ceasefire at the end of these three phases of truce?
I think one would have to be very cautious about, or rather not over-optimistic about the future, simply because that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his supporters in the leadership still want to eliminate Hamas. And if that is their objective, then I think they will be able to wreck this ceasefire either at the end of the first stage or at the start of the second stage. I mean, the third stage is something that deals with the reconstruction of Gaza, and that requires billions and billions of dollars. And then the question is, I mean, some people have estimated to be between 50 to 80 billion dollars. Then the question is where that money is going to come from, which countries are going to really participate in the reconstruction of Gaza, and whether Israel still would allow the reconstruction of Gaza with participation of Hamas. And I think that is where really big questions lies, and the future seems quite uncertain.
There's certainly still a long way to go. Professor Amin Saikal, always good to get your thoughts. Thank you again for joining us.